Yeah, welcome back, everyone. I'm your host for this session. I'm Florian Rappel, and I'm with me here with Henrik, who is also a coach and consultant working at WPS Solutions. And he will also give us today a very nice introduction and I think some very useful insights into domain-driven transformations. To actually bring some architecture back to legacy monoliths, a topic that I also find very interesting. So how are you?
I'm fine, although I had to do some last minute changes. My daughter is sick, so I had to stay in the home office. That's why you see there's some balloons here. I couldn't change the decoration.
I hope she
It's the
gets
great thing
well soon.
about the new work, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So for us here, vacation just started, so my daughters are at home too. But that's not the only reason why I'm doing home office today. But it seems like we are all back at our home offices, so all good here. Great. So can you give us already some let's say teasers what you will talk about in your talk?
Yeah, Flo, you mentioned it. We are going to transform existing software, legacy software. And that's, if we're honest, the case that most of us are working and most of us are not working on a green field building new software. And even if we are next year or in 2 years, we will be in the brown field. We will work on legacy software. So it's, I think, for every developer important to know what to do if we work with systems that are already there. And we're going to see here how we can bring back architecture structure into those systems.
Nice, nice, very interesting. So I'm already quite excited, and that's when you get the playing field. So the stage is all yours.
Okay, Flo, thank you very much. And also welcome from my side to this talk, Domain-Driven Transformation. Good morning. I would like to tell you a little story for starters. So when I was a little boy, my grandmother used to take me by the hand and take me down to the port. And there she showed me the big ships, the big steamers that came in and out of the port. And she showed me also the big old warehouse where already her father, my great grandfather, had traded cocoa and coffee. And when my great grandfather had opened his window, he could smell the big wide world. He could smell ripening bananas, roasting coffee, sometimes even wild animals. And back in his days, the ships, well, they were unloaded by a man who literally carried the cargo on their backs from the ship into warehouses like this here. And well, then the container was invented and the times changed forever. Just like a couple of decades later for us, the container was invented and changed times forever. But here I'm not talking about Docker. When I talk about containers here, I mean these big steel boxes that changed seafaring forever. And when you look closely, you can see that these old warehouses where the men carried the cargo in the old days, well, they were abandoned, and you can see the decay here, and there's graffiti there. And so a big part of the harbor was abandoned for a long time, and these warehouses, they became old. And at some point, the Senate of the city said, well, let's do something with this old area of the harbor. Let's build something new out of it. So a plan was made and said, well, let's take this old warehouse and build a concert hall on top of it. And well, then they started construction and they, well, demolished the core, the inside of the old building, but they let the walls outside stand. And then here you can see the concert hall and a hotel was built on top of that. And it took years and years, literally, and eventually it was done. And then there was a big party, to be honest, 10 years later than planned and 10 times more expensive than planned. But now there it is in my hometown in Hamburg, in Germany. You can see this new concert hall, the Elbphilharmonie here. And now again, the world, the big wide world, is coming back to the old warehouse. Now it's singers from Ukraine, musicians from China, and tourists from Australia and America coming to the old warehouse again. And what we did with the old warehouse, or what was done with the old warehouse, that's what we want to do with the old software as well. We want to take something old and monolithic, keep the nice parts, the beautiful parts, and build something new and useful out of this old stuff again. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next 45 minutes. And who am I? My name is Henning Schwentner. You already heard that. I'm known as the guy with the many kids in the community. And I work as a coder, coach, and consultant at a company called WPS. And this topic of transforming old legacy systems, that takes me so much that I've just published a book on that. You can see that on the right here, Domain-Driven Transformation. That is the book to the talk. The English edition is just going to print. A German edition is already out there. And my other book is Domain Storytelling and Storytelling. I would like to tell you another story now, a story about software, a story about a company that has a big old legacy software system in place and wants to transform it. That company is called Alpine Auto Leasing Inc. And guess what they do? They're doing auto leasing. What's auto leasing? Well, if you want to have a new car, usually you have to give a big bag of money to a car manufacturer. Then the car manufacturer gives you a car. If you don't have a big bag of money, well, that's the point where the leasing company, in our case, Alpine, comes in between. And the leasing company will now pay the price, give the big bag of money to the car manufacturer. The car manufacturer will give the car to the end customer, and the end customer will then make a monthly payment, the so-called installment, to the leasing company, to Alpine. And I think we can all well imagine that there is, sorry, we can all well imagine that there is a big old legacy system in place, which is called Monoliths, obviously. And Monoliths is 25 years old, built in the technology that was en vogue back in the day, around the start of the new millennium. And if we take a closer look in a C4 context diagram, we can see here Monoliths is a system that is used, Monoliths, you can see that here, that is used by the salesperson and the risk manager, and not the customer itself. The customer, they are closing a leasing contract with a salesperson, and then the salesperson is using the system, and the risk manager is also using the system. So Monolith is a bit like the ship here. It was beautiful back in the day. Today it looks a bit, well, old-fashioned, and also, well, it looks kind of used. Nonetheless, the boss of Alpine says, well, dear IT department, please modernize our old system. And I think he's doing something important here. He's not saying throw this old wreck of a ship away. No, he sees that there's something important, something valuable inside of this old legacy software. There's a treasure inside here, a treasure of domain knowledge, and it's worth to get this treasure of domain knowledge out of the old system. That's a good idea. And that's the first thing that you have to learn when you work with legacy systems, when you work with old systems, that you have to change your mind from this guy here who thinks, oh my God, I hate this old mess, to, well, this system has earned our company a lot of money for decades. So this system did its job well. That's the reason why it became so old. All the other systems that were built in the 25 years that didn't do their job well, these systems, they are not there anymore. We don't have to worry about them, but we have to worry about the systems that did their job well. And why did they do their job well? Because they supported the work of their users. And the users, the people from the domain, that's what we care about. We want to support their work. And to get this treasure out of the old system, the first thing to do is we have to find out what is the problem of our system. So if we think about our system as a patient, then we have to first find out, we as doctors, what are the diseases that our patient suffers from. And that's important because different diseases, they require different treatment, right? And what are the typical diseases that we can find in a legacy system? So one typical disease that we find is that the old system has become a big ball of mud. That means there is no structure in it. Everything is connected to everything else. And especially for us important today is there is no vertical structure inside the system. Then the second disease that we often find is that the code has only poorly expressed the domain knowledge. That means the domain code and the technical code, they are mixed up. There might be a dynamic domain model. There might be no domain language in the code. If we look at a line of code, it's not clear, is this business logic or is this technical logic? That is all problematic. That's also a disease that we want to heal here. And then the third disease that we often find is the bad team organization or the unfitting team organization. For a monolithic software, a monolithic team might be okay, or layer teams might be okay. Now, where we want to transform into a more vertical structure, we need also vertical teams here. Okay, so what are we going to do about this? Well, in our book, Carola and I say, well, there's cures for all these diseases. There's strategic transformation against the big ball of mud. There is tactical transformation against the poorly expressed domain knowledge. And there is team organizational transformation against the bad team organization. Transformation, that's something big. We need smaller steps that we can take. And that's why there are refactorings defined that can help us here. For the strategic transformation, we have strategic refactorings, still something big that we have to split up into tactical refactorings that help us strengthen the domain knowledge in the code. Then there's socio-technical refactorings for the team organization and transformation, and there are tactical refactorings against model anemia in the tactical transformation. Of course, we only have 45 minutes today, so we cannot look at all these refactorings. If you want to have a detailed look, please have a look at the catalog that I collect on my website, Domain-Driven Refactorings here. And 1 second, please, sorry. Okay, so that is the catalog. There you can find the catalog of refactorings. We will focus today on the strategic part because that is the part that most teams that I work with have the biggest problems. And strategic transformation, what is that about? Well, that is fighting against the big ball of mud. This thing here, we want to bring order to it. And so you can see here, we want to transform it into vertical units, smaller units. We want to come from the big ball of mud to what's called bounded contexts or microservices in some way. So, and what you can see here is it's just 4 steps that we have to take. And well, just 4 steps, of course, these steps, they are big steps and they take a lot of time and they are complicated. And also it's not like a waterfall, these steps, it's iterative, incremental. We have to run through these steps again and again. But these steps, having these steps, can help us get the idea of how we can get a grip of the old system. And the first step is we have to put the monolith aside. We have to rediscover the domain knowledge. We understand what's really the problem that we are solving with our solution. With that knowledge, the regained knowledge of the domain, we can then move on to the second step, and that is modeling the target architecture. So with the knowledge that we have today, what would be the ideal architecture that we would want to build? Then the third step, we get out the monolith and we see what is the current architecture, and well, from the current architecture to the target architecture, which is the way, what is the direction that we have to take. And the fourth step is we want to do the move. And let's have a closer look at these 4 steps. The first step, the domain rediscovery. What is that about? So what might be counterintuitive, but what is important is that the first thing we have to do when we want to split a monolithic piece of software is that we have to first put that old monolithic software aside, that we have to move on from the brown field that we are working on, move on to a mental green field. So we have to cleanse our mind from the solution that we already have and focus on the problem again. Because the solution that we have, well, it might fit the problem from yesterday, or maybe it was never the perfect solution. We have to re-understand what the problem really is. We have to understand what's there in the domain. So again, we have to do a mindset switch. And we have to move on from thinking about technology, from just being programmers, to we think about the business. We are programmers and business enablers. Well, it's not about software as an end in itself. It is using software as a means to an end, and that end is we want to be able to support the work of our users, of our domain experts. So we have to move on from thinking about the tooth wheels to thinking about the dollars here. And how can we do that? How can we understand the domain, rediscover the domain? That's where collaborative modeling comes into play. Collaborative modeling is a family of methods, and those methods are lightweight. One famous example is event storming, that's done with sticky notes, or another collaborative modeling method is domain storytelling, that's with stick figures and arrows. So lightweight, because we want to have tools that can be easily understood by our users. It's called collaborative modeling because we want to model together, us and them, us technical people and them, domain experts, people that are using the software. And in our example at Alphorn, that means we will invite the business people, the domain people into a workshop. We will invite a salesperson, we will invite a customer, we will invite a risk manager, and let them tell their story, understand what they are doing. And then the customer starts and tells us, well, the first thing I do is I tell my wish for a car to the salesperson. And the salesperson tells us, well, I calculate the installment for the contract. Installment, we ask, what does that mean? A word that we don't know. Yeah, the salesperson tells us installment, that's the monthly payment that the customer has to make. And let's assume the customer can afford that installment, then the customer will sign the contract for the salesperson. And then the salesperson will pass on that contract to the risk manager. The risk manager will check the credit rating, that is the risk of the customer. The risk manager calculates the resale value, that is the risk of the car. And based on the credit rating check and the calculation of the resale value, the risk manager votes the contract. To vote means say, yes, we want to do this contract, or no, the risk is too high for this contract, we can't do it. Let's assume the risk manager votes positively, votes yes, then the salesperson can give the car to the customer. So what you can see here is called a domain story from domain storytelling. The idea is we let our domain experts tell their story, thus domain storytelling. And while the domain experts are telling their story, we record that story and a graphical notation. So we draw a diagram, and thus we can reflect our users. And this is what I have understood. Did I get you right? And then my domain experts can say, yeah, you got me right, or no, we have to change this a bit here. When you think about the story that we can see here, that's interesting. We see many words from the domain. We see many leasing words, but no technical words. And that is good. As I said, we want to re-understand the domain. We want to re-understand the problem, not focus on the solution. If you want to know more about this special technique, domain storytelling, then please read my book on the topic of domain storytelling. Or if you're generally interested in these kinds of methods, the Como Camp, that's the yearly unconference on that topic. It was just 2 weeks ago, but it will happen again next year, also beginning of May. So with this step number 1, re-understanding the domain, we can now move on to step number 2, determining the target architecture. And that means especially finding the vertical architecture, and this we do by drawing boundaries. So in our domain story, we draw boundaries by saying, or by asking, which activities belong together from the perspective of the actors. What are actors? When we go back to our domain story, you can see these stick figures, those are the actors. And then we have the work objects here, the car, the contract. And then we have the arrows, those are called activities, like here, give, or sign, or tell. Those are the simple elements of a domain story. So we discuss with our users here where are boundaries, which activities belong together. And then we learn, well, the activities 1, 2, 3, and 8, they belong together and they form what we call a subdomain. Subdomain is a part of the whole domain. And this subdomain is called sales. And then we learn the steps 5, 6, and 7, they form another area, another subdomain here, which is called risk assessment. And with this knowledge that we can split up our domain into subdomains, we develop our idea of the target architecture of the system. Because now we say, well, let's put this into another diagram, a context map, where we have one context sales and another context risk assessment, or one module sales, another module risk assessment. So we will not build a monolithic system anymore. We will now build a modular system, and 2 modules we just found will be called sales and risk assessment. So what we are doing is we are using the domain knowledge to drive our architecture. That's why it's called domain-driven design, or what we're doing here, domain-driven architecture, because the domain knowledge drives our architecture, drives our design. And of course, in real life, there will be more than 2 modules that we can find here. If you are, if you know about these DDD words, DDD, domain-driven design, then the things that we found here, these modules, they will be called bounded contexts in the DDD speech. Okay. With this idea of the target architecture, with this idea, this is where we want to go, we can then see, well, where are we now? So let's align the current architecture with the target architecture. And to determine the current architecture, we need the source code of the system, of course, and the developers who tell us how the architecture is. And usually it's a good idea to have an architecture analyst to get an understanding of that. And maybe this architecture analyst will use an analysis tool. Can do it manually. Often it's a better idea to use a tool. If you want to have a deeper look into these tools, then I can recommend you this book here by my co-author, Carola, Sustainable Software Architecture. So in our case at Alphorn, we found out that we have this system here, which is used by the salesperson and the risk manager. This is a high-level view of the system. Let's have a closer look at the system. When we go down from the context view to the containers view, we will see that Monolith is built out of a front end, a back end, and a database. And you can see, well, as I said, it's built with a technology that were in vogue at that time. The backend is built in EJB2. Yeah, serverless JSPs. Well, what's good about what we can see here is we apparently have some sort of architecture. We have layered architecture. So the front end knows the back end knows the database, but not the other way around. You can see these arrows here, they point from the top to the bottom, and that's good. We have some structure here. And when we go deeper into the components view, we can see the front end is built from a leasing servlet and a partner servlet, and the back end there's a calculator and a contract service, partner service. Again, focusing on what's good here is we can see a lot of domain words. We can see domain language, or ubiquitous language as it's called in DDD. That's nice. Even the database tables have names from the domain. What's not so nice is that we can see the language, yes, and we can see the horizontal architecture, the layers, but there is no vertical structure. There is no structure from top to bottom. That's why we call this a big ball of mud, right? And wait a second. Okay, so we have no vertical structuring here. We have what's called a big ball of mud. And what are we going to do about that? Well, first, let's have a look. Where would we want to have our boundaries? Where would we find that in the backend? Let's focus on the backend first, because that's already complicated enough. So we have these bounded contexts. We found these bounded contexts, sales and risk assessment here. And where do we find them inside of our backend? So for one thing, we would say, well, sales, we have that here. Oh, wait a second.
Sorry, folks, for the interruption. But modern software needs our assistance every day, right? And I hope Henry will be back. Henning will be back any second now. Yeah, in the meantime, I will just keep talking to entertain you at least a little bit, and also maybe make a little bit of an advertisement here. Yeah, he's back. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Flo.
Yeah, all right.
Quicker. So sorry. Maybe I go back a slide again. So where do we find the boundaries in this system that we have already? So when we bring the knowledge that we found in our domain story together with this architecture, we can see, well, for sales, we need the calculator and the contract servers and the contract and the partner. And for risk assessment, we need the partner service and also the contract servers and the contract and the partner. So we can see there are some parts which are easy to split, like the calculator and the partner service. But what we also can see is there's a big overlap here in the middle. And what are we doing about that? Well, that's the big problem when working with legacy software, right? So what we would want to do is something like this, right? Have one module, one bounded context sales, and another module, another bounded context risk assessment. But, well, wouldn't this mean that we would have a lot of duplication here? And wouldn't that be bad? Well, to find out if we really have a lot of duplication, we have to go a bit deeper. So yeah, we have this class contract here, but we have to go on a field and method level to see if there's really duplication to be done here. So what can we find on the classes contract service and contract, for example? Where do we find the boundaries of sales and risk assessment there? So when we look into our analysis tool, we can see, well, the contract service has two methods, sign contract and vote contract. And it works on the class contract where we have a contract number and a signature date and a credit rating and a voting result. And all these fields, they have getters and setters, but there is no real domain logic in the contract. So on a side note, this is what's called an anemic domain model. Not so nice, but we will not do anything against the anemia, the model anemia now. We will first split this thing here up. On the other hand, what is maybe kind of nice is that we can see, well, here, sign contract, vote contract, those are names from the domain. That is something that we found in our analysis of the domain already. And when we apply the boundaries that we found to this code, we will find something like this. So in sales, we will need a class contract service and a class contract, and we will need the sign contract logic in the contract service. And in the class contract, we will use the contract number and the signature date. But there's also a lot of stuff that we do not need. The vote contract method, credit rating result, credit rating, voting result, we don't need that. On the other hand, what do we need for the risk assessment? We both need a class contract service and a class contract, but here we need the vote contract logic and the credit rating and the voting result, and we also need the contract number. So when we think about this topic of duplication, the real duplication is, yeah, we need two classes contract service and two classes contract. That's not so bad. And we need the contract number, which is no surprise because that's the identity of the contract here. So if we throw out all the stuff that's unnecessary, then we find something like this here. And there's not much duplication going on here. And on the other hand, we get two models which are much smaller. So this is the idea of our target architecture. And if you never have heard about DDD, domain-driven design, and strategic design on the one hand, or microservices on the one hand, then this idea of having several classes which have the same name and represent the same thing, that might feel awkward for you. But it still might be a good idea here. So if you have never heard about that topic, strategic design, DDD, that's something that you want to read. So we have different models here, modeling the same thing, smaller models. And this is our goal architecture, our target architecture. How can we get there? Yeah, well, that's where our refactorings come into play. And what is usually done is that at this point, we write down the refactorings that have to be done. Or to be honest, we write down some of the refactorings that have to be done. Of course, it's iterative, it's incremental. And many teams that have a product backlog put beside that product backlog an improvement backlog where they collect the steps that have to be taken to make their system better. So the first strategic refactoring is extract the context sales. And then another refactoring that we want to do is extract the bounded context risk assessment. Those are big steps, obviously. How can we split them up into smaller steps by saying, well, let's have some technical refactorings as well. Let's extract specialized contract as one thing and as extract a specialized contract service as another thing. And maybe we want to even split these refactorings up into even smaller refactorings. What we need in the end are sprint-ready refactorings. Those are refactorings that are small enough to fit into one sprint if you're working with Scrum, or small enough that they are smaller than the work in progress if you are working with Kanban. And with that, we have a plan. And with this first idea of a plan, we go to step number 4, doing the move. And the first step to doing the move is to plan our transformation into our sprint. So the next time we're planning a sprint, we not only take the product backlog, we also take the improvement backlog with the refactorings that we found. And the sprint backlog is now not only filled with user stories, that's something new, where we build new business value, new requirements, but we also reserve some baseline here in the sprint backlog for the improvement for the refactorings. So you can see here the tactical refactorings 1.1 and 1.2 are planned into the sprint as well, and the strategic refactoring 1 as well. And now we go into the sprint, and when the sprint is done, then the user stories and the tactical refactorings are done, not the strategic, because there is some stuff more here that we need, but we move on, plan the next sprint, and then maybe also the strategic refactoring is done, and we move on again, and so on, and maybe eventually the improvement backlog is empty or not. Of course, in real life, the improvement backlog never gets empty because there's always new stuff that will be added to the improvement backlog. Of course, there's a lot of technical debt, and probably there will also be new technical debt which will be built. And this technical debt is something that we want to get rid of with our improvements. So, truth be told, a transformation is not something that is done. The transformation is something that is ongoing for the whole life cycle of the system here. Okay, that's the plan. And when we look on how it is done, let's look at the code again. So we have the old monolithic system, Monoliths, and we want to carve out a new bounded context. We want to carve out the risk assessment context. And for risk assessment, we know, well, this vote contract logic, we need that. And vote contract is called somewhere in the code. And vote contract, on the other hand, calls get contract number and set credit rating and set voting result on the other hand. So now we have to find the small steps that we can take. And these small steps, they should be viable steps. We want to do the transformation in an evolutionary way. That means every single step should lead to a system that is viable itself, to a system that can be released and usually will be released to production. So the first step that we are going to do is we create an empty module risk assessment. That's something that we could release to production. And then we create an empty class contract service that also could be released to production. And then we copy the logic from vote contract from left to right. That is from the monolith to the risk assessment bounded context. And that means, well, vote contract calls get contract number and set credit rating and set voting result. And now we have a duplication, which is not nice, of course, but we have something that is viable. And that's the important thing here. We can do this step by step. The next thing is do this here. So change the implementation of vote contract on the left so that it is just forwarding to vote contract on the right. Again, this is a viable evolutionary step. And now we have many arrows in the middle, which is not so nice. We want boundaries there, right? So the next thing is that we move the calls of the old method of vote contract in Monoliths to vote contract in the contract service. And maybe this takes a long time because many places in the code call a vote contract. But also eventually it will be done. We will have moved all the old calls of vote contract to calls to the new vote contract, and then we can get rid of the old vote contract. And that's the point in time where we start to strangle the old system, to strangle the monolith. That's the point where the monolith starts to get smaller. That's nice. Okay, and then of course we are doing something similar with the contract. Build an empty class here, move fields over, and then use them here on that side so we can get rid of the first arrow here, and then the credit rating, the same stuff, and the voting result. And then we can get rid of the credit rating here, and we move also the voting result here, and we do this step by step, and eventually we can get rid of more and more stuff in the old system. And now we have only one arrow left here in the middle, and we finally got some real boundaries here, which is nice. And now we did this only on the business logic layer. We want to do that in the UI layer as well, in the database as well. And that, of course, might be harder, but still it is possible. And that's the important lesson here. So when we throw the old stuff out of the monolith, then we get something like this here, which is nice. What would be the next steps when we have done this strategic transformation? Well, that would be tactical transformation probably. So we would look on the right side here on the risk assessment. And I already told you, anemic is what we find here, an anemic domain model. Anemic domain model means the domain data and the domain logic, they are not encapsulated. So we find all the domain logic in the contract service and all the fields, all the data in the contract. It means the class contract cannot ensure that the data is always correct, that it's not corrupted, that it's not that somebody that shouldn't do it brings it into a state which is not viable. So that's where tactical transformation comes into play. And I'm sorry, we don't have the time for that today. So I'm going to jump to the conclusion now. So what else is there? So tactical transformation, I said, yeah, that's something that we want to do. Anti-anemia refactorings for that. Socio-technical transformation is also we want to do. We found the vertical cuts for our system. Now we also have to change the teams. And usually before we can do all this stuff, we have to do what's called technical transformation. An old system and legacy system might not be stable enough to do refactorings to it. So maybe the first thing we have to do is to bring some bigger test coverage to it, or to automate the build, to have continuous integration, to continuous deployment if we don't have this stuff. Some projects, before we can do that, we even have to first introduce source control. If we don't have these things, well, refactorings, they are hard. And that as an outlook, what can be done? What else can be done in the transformation? And of course, when we have a short talk about this topic, it might feel a bit like in this old meme here, how to draw an owl. Easy, draw 2 circles. That's step number 1. And step number 2, now draw the rest of the damn owl. I hope I gave you an impression, an idea of how steps 1A, 1B, 1C could work out. And if you want to know all the details, well, then read my other book, of course. And with that said, I want you to take one lesson that's important. Monolith transformation is possible, and it's hard. So don't make the mistake to go on the journey alone and do all the mistakes yourself. Take someone with you that already did most of the mistakes. And doing some advertisement here, please consider making a blood donation. I don't want to advertise for myself only, also for doing something good. Right after the pandemic, there's not enough blood in the blood banks. Yeah, so please think about your blood, and that's it, the end. And Flo, you turned on your camera again.
All right, perfect. So thanks for the session. We are a little bit over time, but still, maybe we can take one or more questions in there. And let me start with the big topic of organizational changes, because I mean, domain-driven is always very nice and works on paper is maybe the wrong word, because getting there is of course the hard part, right? And making it even work on paper is quite often very challenging. This is of course this is all paperwork, right? Anyway, but quite often, of course, and I mean, I'm coming from the micro front-end perspective, very often the hurdles are not, let's say, the technical aspects, but very often an organizational one. So what are your recommendations? How can you introduce this kind of change and paradigm shift, maybe in a soft way, to have some transition and to bring it into, to let it sink into the organization very nicely?
Yeah. So first, it's important to see that software is not just a technical system. Software is a socio-technical system, and the organization of the people has a direct influence in the software architecture. So this is expressed in Conway's law, right? We often see that here. Conway's law basically says the team organization that you choose for your teams will be reflected in the architecture of your system. And that means that you have to be careful with layer teams, for example. This is something that I often find in legacy systems, that we say, well, we bring all the experts together. So we have a database team and a business logic team and a presentation team, and all the UI experts, they are in the presentation end. This is not, of course, not a micro front end. This is the macro front end, the one big front end for everything. Mm-hmm. And when we want to have vertical cuts in the system, it's important to see that we need vertical cuts in the team also. So what we want to do is, I showed again, is this here. From layer teams move on to cross-functional teams, and then all these teams here, team A and team B and team C, they are cross-functional. That means, for example, they all build their own front end, and that means they all have to know the front end expertise. Not the whole team, but every teams need at least one front end expert. So that's why we're talking about cross-functional teams. And then, of course, we're touching agile topics, like we need T-shaped skill profiling for the team members and so on. And what is important for the topic today is that strategic transformation and socio-technical transformation, they always go hand in hand, just because of Conway's law. So you cannot do only strategic transformation. You have to reorganize your people as well. You have to reorganize your teams as well.
Awesome. All right. So thinking of time, there are no more questions, and we are already a little bit over. Thanks again, Henning, for the nice presentation. And to your daughter, get well soon. And
thank you.
Have a nice rest of the day. Everyone, enjoy the conference.
Flo, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.